It started like any other quiet Saturday at the lake. My cabin sat peacefully, untouched, surrounded by tall pines and the soft sound of waves brushing against the shore. I wasn't even planning to go there that weekend, but I had forgotten some important documents inside. So I made a quick drive out to grab them and maybe sit on the deck for a little peace. That's all I expected, peace. What I got instead was an HOA ambush. As I pulled up the gravel path to my cabin, I immediately noticed a line of SUVs and a golf cart parked out front. That was weird. I don't allow anyone on this part of the property. It's marked as private. I even have signs. But before I could even open my car door, I spotted her, the HOA President, standing near my cabin porch, waving to her group of well-dressed guests as if she were about to lead them on a private resort tour. I stepped out slowly, confused and calm. She spotted me and gave a stiff little smile that quickly disappeared. Her face tightened. She walked straight toward me, arms crossed, like I was the one trespassing. "Oh, you're here," she said flatly. "I told your neighbor we were hosting a small lakeside brunch. We'll only be using the deck for an hour." I blinked. I wasn't even sure how to respond. She didn't ask. She didn't call. She just showed up with people I didn't know and decided my cabin was her venue of choice. I looked past her, and sure enough, some of the guests were trying to peek through the windows, others taking selfies by the water. "No," I said, keeping my voice level. "This is private property. You can't just use my place like a clubhouse." That's when her whole face changed. Her lips thinned. Her eyebrows pulled together. She took a step closer. "We have a right to shared lake access," she snapped. "You're part of the HOA. That cabin isn't just yours. It's community property." That's when I knew she was either lying, or she really had no idea how property laws work. I own that cabin outright. It's on its own parcel. The HOA covers the common entrance road and some landscaping, that's it. They don't own my land. They don't own my locks. And they sure don't own my keys. I explained this to her, briefly. I didn't want a scene. I didn't raise my voice. But she was already getting louder than she needed to be. "So you're saying no?" she barked. "You're really going to turn away a group of guests who just wanted to enjoy the lake for a few hours? What kind of neighbor does that?" At this point, people were starting to stare. One guest awkwardly walked back to their car. A couple whispered near the trees, clearly uncomfortable. But she didn't care. She was doubling down. "You are required to cooperate with the board," she said. "This is a board-approved event." I asked her to show me any paperwork, any email, any kind of vote that gave her the right to unlock someone else's cabin and throw a party. She didn't have any. She didn't even try. She just glared at me like I was the villain, like I was ruining her perfectly curated brunch. Then, the moment that made my jaw drop, she demanded that I unlock the door. Said if I didn't, she would have a locksmith come out and solve the problem. Now I don't know about you, but when someone threatens to break into your house and act like it's their right, that's not just bold, that's wild. I told her point blank, if she tried to touch that door, I'd be calling the sheriff. And I meant it. She exploded. Not physically, but verbally. She yelled in front of everyone. "This is what happens when people forget they're part of a community," she shouted. "Selfish homeowners ruin everything." It was almost surreal. Here I was, standing on my own land, in front of my own cabin, being scolded for not handing over my keys to a bunch of strangers. And the best part? She was just getting started. If you're enjoying these stories and want more real-life HOA drama and satisfying revenge, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. She wasn't done. Not even close. After her public meltdown, I honestly thought she'd be embarrassed enough to pack up and leave. But instead, she doubled down with this smug little smirk, like she knew something I didn't. That's when I realized, this wasn't just some last-minute brunch idea. She had been planning this. She had been counting on me not being there. One of her guests, a guy in a pastel polo shirt, walked up to her and whispered something. She gave a tight smile and nodded, then turned to me again, calm now, but with this fake sweet tone that made my skin crawl. "Well," she said, "since you're here, why don't you just unlock it and let us stay for a bit? We'll be quick, I promise." I didn't say anything. I just stared at her. She stepped closer, lowering her voice so the guests wouldn't hear. Look, you're not exactly popular in the community right now. Refusing to let us use the lake? That doesn't sit well. Why make things harder for yourself? There it was, the real reason she was pushing this hard. Control. Intimidation. She wanted me to give in so she could flex her authority in front of everyone else. It had nothing to do with brunch or the lake view. It was about power and showing the other neighbors who really ran things around here. So I did what any reasonable person would do. I pulled out my phone and started recording. Her eyes flicked to the camera, and her tone changed instantly. Sir, she said, I'm asking nicely, but this cabin is part of our shared HOA zone and we have the right. No, I said calmly. You don't. Then I turned the phone toward myself and said, for the record, the HOA President is demanding access to my private cabin without permission and without any legal authority. I am refusing because this is trespassing. She took a step back. You're being dramatic, she hissed. I kept the camera on her. Then call the sheriff and we'll let them decide. That hit her like a slap. She blinked fast and looked around, realizing most of the guests were now watching and probably wondering what the hell was going on. Some of them had already started quietly backing away. One lady even said, maybe we should just leave. This is private, right? But the president wasn't ready to back down. She waved her arms at the group. Everyone, just stay where you are. It's fine. This is an internal HOA issue. We'll resolve it. She turned back to me again, eyes flashing. You're not making a good impression on the neighborhood, you know. I almost laughed. Lady, I didn't buy a lake cabin to impress my neighbors. I bought it to be left alone. That seemed to break something in her. She glared at me like she wanted to explode again, but instead she stormed toward her golf cart, yanked out a clipboard, and started flipping through papers like she could magically produce a law that gave her the right to break into my house. Spoiler, she didn't find one. In fact, what she handed me was an event flyer. That's it. A piece of glossy paper with pictures of mimosas, lake views, and the words HOA Lakeside Welcome Social, hosted by HOA President. Nowhere on it did it mention me. My property. My name. No permission granted. Nothing. Just a self-appointed title and a big assumption that no one would dare say no to her. I handed the flyer back without a word. At that point, the crowd was thinning. A few cars had already pulled away. Someone whispered, I didn't know this wasn't part of the HO. Another man looked at me, shrugged, and said, sorry man. We were told it was cleared. I nodded. No hard feelings. But this is my land. Always has been. She didn't like that one bit. She stomped back up to the porch like she owned it, looked at the locked door, and then turned to me again. You'll regret this, she muttered. But I wasn't worried. Not at all. Because this wasn't the first time she had tried to bend the rules. And it definitely wasn't going to be the last. By the time most of her guests had left, the only thing more uncomfortable than the awkward silence was the forced grin still stuck on the HOA president's face. She was clearly trying to act like everything was under control, like this whole event hadn't just fallen apart in front of everyone. But her eyes were darting. Her hands were fidgeting. And every few seconds, she'd glance back at my cabin door, as if she could will it to open. Then, just when I thought it was over, she pulled out her phone and started dialing. She turned away, speaking in this low, dramatic tone, just loud enough for me to hear. Yes, I need someone from compliance to come out immediately. One of our members is actively obstructing a board-sanctioned event. Yes, it's urgent. I raised an eyebrow. Compliance? For what? Not letting strangers into my house. She ended the call and turned back toward me with this smug expression, like she had just summoned the cavalry. Compliance will be here shortly, she said. Let's see what they have to say. Now let me be clear, there is no such thing as an HOA compliance officer who has the legal authority to override property rights. This isn't a city ordinance or a police matter. It's a volunteer position, and their enforcement basically amounts to sending you a strongly worded letter about weeds or mailbox paint. So I just leaned on my car and waited. I figured if she wanted to make a scene, I'd let her dig her own hole. About 20 minutes later, a silver SUV pulled into the driveway. Out stepped a guy in a polo shirt with an HOA badge clipped to his belt like he was on some kind of mission. He looked from her to me, then over to the cabin. She rushed over, practically dragging him by the arm. "That's him," she said, pointing. "He's refusing to comply with our event policy. We had this cabin reserved for the welcome brunch." The man looked confused. "Was there a reservation request submitted?" She stammered. "Well, it was assumed. It's common courtesy. He's part of the HOA. I crossed my arms. "Actually, I'm not. My cabin isn't under your HOA jurisdiction. It's privately deeded. Separate lot, separate zoning. Always has been." He looked back at her. "Is that true?" She didn't answer. Just kind of fumed in place, lips pressed together. I pulled out a copy of my land survey and deed from the folder in my glove box, something I keep handy for exactly this kind of nonsense. I handed it over to him. He scanned it quickly, then gave a low whistle. "Yeah, this parcel isn't even in your HOA map. He's not under your authority." That shut her up fast. She looked like someone had pulled the rug out from under her. But she still wasn't ready to let go. "Well," she huffed, "it's still incredibly unfriendly. He could have allowed us to use the space. It reflects poorly on the neighborhood." I gave a short laugh. "You mean it reflects poorly on you? For inviting people to private property you don't own?" The HOA compliance guy actually gave a small nod. "He's right. This isn't enforceable. I'd suggest you clear the area before this becomes a bigger issue." Her mouth opened and closed like she wanted to say something, but nothing came out. Finally, with one last glare in my direction, she stomped off to her golf cart, muttering something under her breath about "not over yet" and board review. The compliance officer stayed behind a moment. "Sorry about that," he said. "Overreaches sometimes. You'd be surprised how often I see this kind of thing." I just shrugged. Honestly, not surprised at all. He got in his SUV and drove off. And just like that, the driveway was empty again. Quiet. Still, just the way I liked it. But I knew this wasn't the end. Not with someone like her. The type who doesn't take "no" as a final answer. The kind who thinks rules apply to everyone but themselves. And sure enough, I didn't even make it back into the cabin before her next move started taking shape. 2 days later, I got the letter. Not an email. Not a phone call. A hand-delivered envelope taped right to my cabin door. Bright red lettering on the front. HOA formal notice. Now remember, I'm not even part of their HOA. But that didn't stop her. Inside was a 2-page violation report filled with all kinds of nonsense. Non-compliance with neighborhood event policy, hostile behavior toward board leadership, and my favorite, failure to uphold community spirit. Community spirit? Seriously? I read the whole thing twice just to make sure I wasn't imagining things. It looked official, stamped, signed, even had a fake case number. But the wording was weak. Full of empty warnings like "subject to further action" and "strongly encouraged to attend a disciplinary hearing." They couldn't find me. They couldn't suspend anything. But they were trying to scare me into showing up and playing along. But here's the part that really made me stop. At the bottom of the second page, it said, "Pending resolution, you are temporarily prohibited from using shared amenities including the lake, walking paths, and common grounds." That's when I laughed out loud. These people were actually trying to ban me from using my own lake access. A lake I paid taxes on. A cabin I bought outright. And they thought a letter printed on HOA letterhead would be enough to make me back off. I took a photo of the letter. Then I walked right over to my dock, cracked open a lawn chair, and sat there for a good hour sipping coffee and tossing stones into the water. I made sure to take a selfie and posted it in the neighborhood group chat with the caption, "Enjoying the lake, like always." It didn't take long for the comments to roll in. Some folks were laughing, others were confused. A couple asked, "Wait, I thought your cabin was an HOA?" And I answered every single one. Calmly. With receipts. Screenshots of the deed. The survey map. Even a snippet from the county office website proving my parcel was excluded from HOA control. That post ended up doing more damage to her reputation than anything I could have said in person. The more people saw it, the more they realized just how far she had overstepped. But rather than backing off, she came up with a new plan. She went door to door trying to rally support. One neighbor, an older gentleman who had lived in the area for decades, told me she showed up with a clipboard asking for signatures to limit non-compliant property owners' lake access. His response? You mean the guy who owns the land and doesn't answer to the HOA? She didn't like that answer either. Then she tried a different approach. She started pushing a new policy in the next HOA meeting, one that would extend community governance to all lake-adjacent properties, even ones outside the original boundary lines. Basically, she wanted to redraw the HOA map to rope me in. Only problem? She didn't realize how many people had quietly turned against her. When the motion came up for discussion, several neighbors stood up and said things like, Asterisk, we're not here to micromanage someone's private land. Asterisk, this is about personal power, not community needs. Asterisk, he's never caused trouble. You're creating it. It was one of the first times I actually felt like people saw through her mask. But the craziest part? She still didn't stop. 2 days later, I noticed a small sign near the trail entrance by my cabin. It looked new. I walked over and saw this printed in bold letters. Private access restricted to HOA members only. I knew right away who put it there. It wasn't even official. No logo, no permit. Just a sign staked into the ground like a scare tactic. I pulled it right up and left it on her front porch with a sticky note that said, "Try again." But the game wasn't over yet. Because the very next morning, she showed up again. Only this time, she didn't come with guests or brunch plans. She came with something else entirely, a locksmith. The sound of metal tools scraping against my cabin's front door was the first thing I heard when I pulled into the driveway. I had gone into town for less than an hour, just to grab some groceries and a cup of coffee. But in that short window, she had made her move. There he was, a locksmith kneeling by my door, drill in hand, toolbox open. And standing over him like she was directing a military operation? The HOA President. Arms folded. Chin high. Like she had finally won. I stopped my truck, stepped out slowly, and didn't say a word. Just stood there watching. The locksmith glanced up and froze. He looked between me and the woman, clearly realizing this wasn't going how he expected. I walked over calmly and said, "Hey there. Mind telling me what you're doing to my front door?" He stood up awkwardly. I was told this was an HOA-owned unit. She said she had board authorization. I stared at her, dead silent. She didn't even flinch. You left it unattended. It was becoming a safety concern. We had an event planned, and your refusal to cooperate forced us to take action. You broke into my property, I said. You brought a contractor here under false claims. That's criminal trespassing. She waved her hand like I was being dramatic. Oh, please. This isn't a crime. This is enforcement. The locksmith looked visibly shaken. Ma'am, I need to verify ownership before I go any further. I'm not drilling anything unless I'm absolutely sure. Good idea, I said. Because the sheriff's on the way. Her face twitched. That one sentence was enough to shake her carefully built confidence. You're bluffing, she said, but her voice wasn't as steady this time. Nope. Already called them from the road when I saw your car on camera. That's right. I had a motion camera set up by the cabin porch. It sent me an alert the second she stepped onto the deck. I saw her and the locksmith walk up. I even had footage of her holding the new door handle she clearly planned to install. She started pacing, muttering under her breath about taking back control and setting an example. Meanwhile, the locksmith picked up his tools and started backing toward his van. I'm not getting in the middle of this, he said. Sorry. I need to go. She tried to stop him, but he wasn't having it. He climbed in and pulled away before she could say another word. We stood there in silence for a moment. The only sounds were the wind in the trees and the distant hum of a boat on the lake. Then she turned back to me. This isn't over, she said again, her voice cold. You think you're above the community? You're not. I just pointed at the sign on my cabin wall, the one with my property parcel number and the county zoning code. This cabin isn't part of your community. And you just proved, again, that you don't care about the law. You care about control." She didn't reply. She just stormed off toward her car, heels crunching over gravel like thunder. When the sheriff finally arrived, a tall, quiet man who looked more amused than alarmed, I showed him the footage. Showed him the letter. Showed him the sign she planted, the fake violation notice, and now, the attempted break-in. He nodded slowly and said, "Yeah, that's not how HOAs are supposed to operate." I asked if I could press charges. He sighed. "You could, but honestly, your best bet is a restraining order. She's going to keep escalating until a judge tells her to back off." That hit me hard. Because he was right. I had tried being polite. I had tried standing my ground. I even shared the facts publicly. But people like her, they don't stop until someone forces them to. The sheriff offered to file a report, and I accepted. As he drove away, I locked the door behind me and looked out at the lake. What was once my quiet escape had now turned into a full-blown battle zone. And somehow, I knew, the next move she made was going to be even bigger. By the next HOA meeting, the entire neighborhood had heard about the locksmith incident. Not from me, from her. She had spun the story like I was some rogue homeowner trying to undermine community safety, throwing around phrases like dangerous noncompliance and lack of cooperation with board initiatives. But people weren't buying it anymore. In fact, some of the same neighbors who once avoided taking sides were now showing up to the meetings with questions. A lot of them. One man even stood up and asked, "Why are we spending time and energy trying to access a cabin that doesn't even fall under HOA jurisdiction?" She tried to redirect the conversation. Claimed the lake area was part of a shared enjoyment zone. That's when another neighbor raised their hand and said, "So if that's true, why didn't we all get a vote on this supposed event?" Silence. Her power was slipping. You could feel it. Her voice got higher, her explanations longer. But the room had changed. People weren't nodding anymore. They were watching. And I wasn't even at that meeting. I got all of this from a neighbor named Jeff, a retired firefighter who'd lived on the other side of the lake for 20 years. He'd never had a problem with her before, but he told me that when she tried to pass a motion to extend HOA oversight to all adjacent lake lots, he stood up and flat out said, "This is a power grab. Nothing more." It got voted down. 3 days later, I noticed a drone hovering outside my cabin window. It buzzed for a few minutes, circled the property, then zipped back toward the HOA President's house, which sat 2 lots away. Now, I don't want to jump to conclusions, but I hadn't seen a drone once in 5 years of owning that cabin, and suddenly one was mapping out my yard? I didn't do anything drastic. Just made sure my cameras caught everything. I called the sheriff's office again and asked a simple question. Does someone need permission to fly a drone over private property? Turns out, the answer isn't as simple as yes or no. But if it's being used to harass, record without consent, or invade your personal space, it's a problem. And guess what? The footage clearly showed the drone lingering around windows and porches. I sent the sheriff the files. That same week, I got a letter from her lawyer. A real one this time, not just something typed up at home. It was carefully worded but ridiculous. It accused me of defamation, harassment, and deliberate obstruction of community development. The lawyer demanded I cease all public commentary about the HOA and threatened a lawsuit if I didn't cooperate with reasonable board expectations. I laughed out loud. Because here's the thing, I had receipts. Video, audio, photos, timestamps, signed documents, even statements from neighbors. If anyone had a legal leg to stand on, it was me. Still, I wasn't about to go back and forth with threats. Instead, I had my attorney send a single-page response. Short, clear, and direct. My client is not a member of your HOA. He is not subject to your board's authority, nor obligated to meet any of your expectations. Any further attempts to intimidate or interfere with his lawful use of private property will be met with legal action. That was it. No fluff. No emotion. Just a boundary. And for a brief moment, things got quiet again. No more fake letters. No more guests. No more events announced without a vote. It felt like maybe, just maybe, she had backed down. But that peace didn't last long. Because she wasn't done trying to get control. She just changed tactics. Instead of trying to physically access my property, she started trying to isolate me from the rest of the neighborhood. Word started spreading. Rumors that I was planning to turn my cabin into a rental. That I was going to allow strangers in. That I was suing the HOA and trying to get it dissolved. None of it true, but just believable enough to spark whispers. Neighbors who used to wave stopped making eye contact. A couple who once invited me for drinks at their fire pit now suddenly weren't available every time I asked. She didn't need to break into my cabin to make a statement anymore. Now she was trying to make me the outsider. And it was working. The shift was subtle at first, no more friendly waves, no more nods when I passed by. Just long stares, quick glances, and that quiet unease you can feel even when no one says a word. It was like the air changed. Suddenly, I was that guy, the outsider, the troublemaker, the one standing in the way of the so-called community. And I knew exactly who was behind it. The HOA president hadn't stopped. She just got sneakier. No more open battles at my front door. Now she was playing the long game, turning people one by one, planting little seeds of doubt until even folks I'd never had a problem with started acting cold. And the worst part? I couldn't always tell who believed her stories and who just didn't want to get involved. A neighbor named Dana used to bring over muffins and chat on my porch. One morning I saw her walking her dog. I smiled and waved like always. She turned her head and crossed the street. Didn't say a word. I wasn't angry. I was disappointed. But I understood. Some people don't want to take sides, especially when the person on the other side holds all the HOA power. One letter, one complaint, and their life becomes paperwork and fines. Still, I wasn't going to let her win by isolation. That's exactly what she wanted, for me to feel cornered, like the only option left was giving in. So I kept showing up. To HOA meetings. To community cleanup days. To lake gatherings. I didn't speak much. I just listened. And waited. And slowly things started to shift. It began with a couple of quiet nods. Then someone came up to me after a meeting and said, "Hey, I saw the footage you posted a while back. That was wild." I didn't know she was pushing it that far. I kept it short, didn't rant, didn't gloat. Just said, it got a little out of hand. More people started asking questions. One guy asked if I really wasn't part of the HOA. I showed him the county zoning map. Another neighbor asked if the thing about the locksmith was true. I showed him the sheriff's report. The truth had never changed, but now people were finally ready to hear it. Then came the final spark. It was at the quarterly HOA meeting, held at the clubhouse down the road. The president was running through the agenda like she always did, until someone raised their hand and said, "Why does our board spend so much time trying to control a property that's not even in our jurisdiction?" You could hear a pin drop. Another person chimed in, "I'm just saying, maybe we should focus more on actual HOA issues. My roof's been leaking for 2 months and no one's returned my maintenance request." Someone else added, "And what's this rumor about banning rentals? Is that even legal?" One by one, people started questioning her, not just about me but about everything. The fees. The power trips. The way she handled complaints. And for the first time, she didn't have control of the room. She got flustered. Defensive. Tried to say the board had always acted in the community's best interest. But no one was buying it. And then Jeff, the retired firefighter, stood up and said what everyone had been thinking. This isn't about rules or safety. This is about control. And a lot of us are tired of it. That meeting ended without applause, without smiles, without the usual closing remarks. People just got up and left. Quiet. Thinking. That night, someone knocked on my door. It was Dana, holding a small plate of cookies. "I'm sorry," she said. "I shouldn't have believed everything I heard." We sat on the porch and talked like old times. She told me how the president had told her I was planning to build a dock for tourists, that I had called the HOA a scam, that I was suing the community. None of it true. The damage had already been done, but at least now, some of the truth was finally starting to cut through the noise. And the HOA president? She wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. Because the very next morning, I woke up to find a certified letter in my mailbox, one that would change everything. The certified letter was thick, too thick to be just another empty threat. I stood in the kitchen, holding it like it might explode. The return address wasn't from her. It was from the HOA's legal counsel, the official one this time. That alone told me she'd escalated things. I slid it open and pulled out several stapled pages. Legal language. Bolded lines. And right at the top, notice of proposed acquisition and jurisdictional review. I read it once, then twice. My jaw clenched tighter each time. She was trying to get the HOA to formally annex my cabin. Not just influence it. Not just pressure me. She wanted the board to vote on extending the HOA boundary lines to include my property, a legal annexation. That would give them the power to enforce rules, issue fines, and even dictate how I use my land. According to the letter, the president had submitted a petition to the county zoning committee claiming there was significant community interest in incorporating nearby parcels into the HOA for safety, environmental consistency, and unified lake access standards. It was so carefully worded, it almost sounded reasonable, until you realized none of it was true. There was no significant community interest. There was just her, and the so-called safety concerns she listed, all connected to me. Overgrown shrubs, potentially unsafe dock, and frequent unauthorized guests. Those weren't real complaints. They were fabricated reasons meant to paint me as a problem, the kind of neighbor who needed to be brought under control. I called my attorney the same day. She read the letter and said, "This is aggressive, but it's not final. We can fight this. And we will." So we got to work. The next week, I gathered everything. Survey maps, title deeds, time-stamped footage, official tax documents showing my cabin's independence from HOA jurisdiction. I even reached out to the previous owner, who wrote a formal statement confirming the property had never been part of any association since the day it was built. Then I filed a formal objection with the zoning board and requested a public hearing. If she wanted to drag this into the legal arena, fine. I wasn't backing down. Word spread fast. The notice was public record, and neighbors started talking again. This time, louder. A lot of them were angry. Not at me, at her. One woman posted in the community Facebook group, "If this goes through, who's next? Who's to say they won't come after my garden or tell me what kind of chairs I can put on my deck?" Someone else replied, "She's trying to create a neighborhood she can control, not one we actually live in." For the first time, it wasn't just me defending my land. Other homeowners were starting to realize what kind of power she was trying to grab, and that it didn't stop with my cabin. The hearing date was set. 2 weeks out. In the days leading up to it, she tried everything to spin the narrative. Flyers. Social media posts. Whisper campaigns. She claimed I was a legal threat to neighborhood unity. Said I was blocking safety upgrades, that I had refused mediation, and that my aggressive posture was hurting property values. But this time, it wasn't working. I saw a neighbor take one of her flyers off the mailbox board and toss it straight into the trash. I saw a group of 3 homeowners standing in the middle of the road, comparing copies of the letter and shaking their heads. Then came the real surprise. Jeff, the retired firefighter, called me one night and said, "I'm speaking at the hearing. On your side. You're not the problem, man. She is." And he wasn't the only one. For more neighbors texted me that week saying they'd be there. A few had never spoken to me before. Now they were offering help. One guy even brought over extra copies of property maps he'd found from when the community was first built, maps that clearly excluded my lot from HOA jurisdiction. The tide was shifting. Not just in my favor, but against her. Still, I knew better than to relax. Not yet. Because people like her don't walk away quietly. They dig in. And when they feel power slipping, they come back harder. And this hearing? It wasn't just about my land anymore. It was about everyone's. The morning of the hearing, the parking lot outside the county office was packed. Way more than I expected. Pickup trucks, golf carts, SUVs. Even people who usually skipped HOA meetings were showing up, some with lawn chairs like it was a front row seat to a show. The moment I stepped out of my truck, I felt it. Not tension, energy. People weren't just curious anymore. They were invested. Some nodded at me. A few even walked over and said, "We've got your back today." Inside the hearing room, it was standing room only. The county officials sat at the front, calm and unreadable, while the HOA president sat on the other side of the room flipping through a color-coded binder like she was prepping for a courtroom drama. She didn't look at me once. When the meeting started, the county clerk read the petition out loud. It sounded sterile on paper, just a request for jurisdictional expansion. But we all knew what it really was, a power grab disguised as community planning. Then they gave her the floor. She stood up with all the confidence in the world and launched into her speech. It was polished. Every word sounded rehearsed. She spoke of safety concerns, uniform standards, and the dangers of fragmented property management. She painted my cabin as an eyesore. Said she had received numerous complaints from other residents who felt excluded from enjoying lake access because of one uncooperative landowner. Then she started showing photos. A close-up of my cabin gate. A drone shot of my dock. Even a blurry image of my car parked near the edge of the woods with the caption, "Suspicious activity, 11:47 p.m. I almost laughed. It looked like a PowerPoint for a crime investigation, all based on nothing. Then it was my turn. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't attack her. I just told the truth. Showed my documents. Held up the property survey, explained the deed, and laid out the timeline of harassment, from fake violation notices to the unauthorized locksmith visit to the drone footage. Then I turned to the board and said, "I'm not here because I'm anti-community. I'm here because I believe in boundaries. Legal ones. Respectful ones. If this petition passes, what's to stop the next homeowner from being pressured the same way I've been?" I stepped down, heart pounding, unsure if I'd said enough or too much. Then something unexpected happened. Jeff stood up. He didn't ask. Didn't wait for permission. Just walked to the front and said, "I've been in this neighborhood for over 20 years. I've seen HOAs do good things. But this isn't one of them. This is control dressed up like concern." He turned to the room and said, "Raise your hand if you've ever had an issue with how the board handles power." Dozens of hands went up. More than I expected. One by one, people spoke. Asterisk a woman said she'd been fined for wind chimes. Asterisk a couple said their deck remodel was delayed 6 months because the president didn't like the color. Asterisk another man admitted he'd been afraid to speak out because he didn't want to be targeted. It wasn't just about my cabin anymore. It was about the climate she'd created. The county board took it all in. Quiet. Focused. After the testimonies, they called for a recess. People poured out into the hallways, buzzing with opinions. I leaned against a wall, exhausted, while Dana handed me a bottle of water and said, "No matter what they decide, you already won." Maybe, but I wasn't letting my guard down just yet. 15 minutes later, everyone was called back in. The lead official stood up, papers in hand, and said, "After reviewing all documentation and testimony, the board finds no compelling legal or community basis to support the proposed jurisdictional expansion. The petition is denied." Just like that. Some people clapped. Others exhaled. She didn't move. The HOA president just sat there frozen, staring straight ahead, binders still open in front of her like she couldn't believe it was over. But it wasn't over. Not really. Because she didn't storm out. She didn't argue. She didn't even speak. And that silence? That was the most dangerous sign of all.